So as an example here I have just a figure here, and then she's got a little t-shirt on. And so this shirt here was all done with just the dynamics. So there is no hand sculpting on this. There may have been one usage of the kind of cloth hook brush on this as well, but in general, this was all just using the collision stuff we've kind of already talked about. So taking this and deforming it to get this effect. So I'm gonna go through the process of how to create this and show you guys the functionality of this, because we've added some new things as well to some additional features, some additional functionality that's allowing us to kind of create these things a little bit faster now inside of ZBrush. So I'm gonna go back to my kind of base here for her, and I'm just gonna zoom her in a little bit here. And basically I wanna start, I wanna give her a garment. So to create a garment, basically I could use the extract method where I could come in and start masking parts out. This would give me a surface, and then I can take that and generate a shape off of that, and then use the simulation and have that constrict back to her body. One thing that we wanted to do is kind of different. One idea we came up with was we had this feature called Snapshot 3D that we introduced a few versions ago, and this would allow you to take a black and white image, basically an alpha, and then you could take that and it would turn it into geometry. So you could import these alphas, you could modify them, and then you could turn them into geometry. So we did something similar for the cloth stuff, and if I go into Lightbox here and go to Spotlight, you can see you're not going to have these little clothing Spotlight files. They're going to be loaded by default in this version. And if I open up one of these, you see this is what kind of going to get. So I have all these different little Spotlight versions of clothing over here, and if I just move these out a little bit, you can see they're just silhouettes. So just think of them as like your basic silhouettes for cloth. Like you don't have to do anything complex. They can really be low res. It doesn't really matter. But basically, if you want a shirt or a dress or anything like that, just think of it as a silhouette. So if you're viewing it from the front, what would it be in just black and white? And these are all just created, inside of I used Affinity for these things. And so I have this kind of shirt here, and I'm simply just going to position this where I want it on my scene. Now you'll also notice with these that there's some coloring on these spotlights as well. And so before, in the previous version of Spotlight, when you just had an alpha, it would just take whatever values that was transparent and not transparent and would give you a shape from it. So now we've added the functionality that Spotlight will now, and Snapshot 3D will actually allow you to transfer color information from that image to the mesh itself. And this will also give you polygrouping. So these little lines here that have been drawn on this map here are going to allow me to isolate and then skip the bridging between them. Because basically I don't want a huge chunk of geometry going through my model, because then it's solid, right? So it's not like a shirt. A shirt or a t-shirt like this, it's gonna have a front panel, a back panel, and then areas cut in between, right? So I'm gonna take this and I'm just going to generate a snapshot 3D from this. We've also added a control functionality. You can add the divisions in between that front panel and the back panel. And that can be done by clicking on the snapshot 3D button here and then rotating it, and this little dial is gonna update, and it's gonna allow you to add divisions between your mesh. So after that has been processed, you can see this is what I get here. And if I turn on my poly paint, you can see that I have that red coloring that I had on that original texture has been transferred to the mesh. And then this is also giving poly grouping. So I can hold Control and Shift and then just isolate these parts out. And now I'm left with just that front, back, and side area. And I have holes for that simulation to work around. Now, Pavlovich was showing that thickness process, and that's another thing that comes into play when doing stuff like this. So I can generate things single-sided, use the simulation on them, and then later on I can determine, hey, I want this to be thicker, I want this to be thinner. And I don't have to go through and reconstruct that inner thickness. I can do it dynamically with that dynamic thickness now. So I've got my front of my shirt here, and you see this is the resolution of that. And now I'm just going to use the simulation for this. And so what I want to do is I want to take this shape and I want it to start conforming to her. So instead of it having going all at once around her, I just basically want it going down the z-axis. So she's facing front and back, and I just want it to constrict around the front and back sides. So I'm going to come over here to the contract option, and in here I'm going to set my value here so it's only happening in z. So this means it's only going to happen in the front and back space of this model. And then if I change my amount, maybe to 2 here, and then run this, you're going to see that form's going to start contracting. Now you'll notice that it's starting to go through the mesh through here. So this is happening because I didn't have a collision volume set for this mesh. So you want to make sure you also recalculate that. And we're talking about that inflate earlier. I can set this down to 0.25 is usually my happy number for things like this. And then I can recalculate that. And once again, the recalculation of this collision is going to go through and look at any subtool I don't have selected that has its eyeball icon turned on and make a collision volume around that. So its prism volume currently for this mesh includes the body and the hair. So that is the volume that's been calculated. And now if I run the simulation here, you're going to see it start contracting to the shape here. And the amount of topology, as Michael was hinting on, is going to allow you to determine how small or large wrinkles are. So if I wanted this to be really, 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 really skin tight, I could leave this here if I wanted, but I'm going to clean this up a little bit. And with the cleanup process, you could use, smooth to come in and start smoothing some of these areas out. But you'll notice oftentimes when you try to use the normal smooth brush on areas like this, it's not going to allow you to kind of smooth that area out. And this is happening because the default smooth brush has a function that's turned on that will restrict any points on a model that have less than 3 edges connected to it. So it's not going to smooth any points that have less than 3 edges connected to it. So what this so what we've done rather, is we've added a new smooth brush, which removes this restriction, or actually applies the value, and now you can smooth open edges. And this is gonna help a lot in cleaning up these single-sided pieces of geometry. So I'm gonna go to the brush palette over here and then isolate by the letter S. And in here we have now a smooth cloth brush, and I can select that brush. And now with this, I can come through, and if I hit those edges again, you can see I can start smoothing those out. So it's gonna allow me to smooth out any of those kind of abnormalities that are coming around that area there. So I'm just smoothing out my initial mesh here some. And then I'm going to thicken up these areas on the top here that kind of got a little distorted. So just using the move brush on this. And this is just your standard ZBrush fare right now. So nothing with the dynamics is really happening right now. Just kind of reconfiguring stuff to make sure everything wraps nicely where I want it to go. Just making these a little bit thicker through here. And then the topology of your mesh will come into play when you're using the dynamics too. So you want to make sure that you have, pretty clean surfaces on your models. So this was a good way to get that base start. I just took that alpha, generated the topology of it, constricted it, and now I got a good start for this mesh. But now I want to go through and just polish it up a little bit more. So I'm coming down the deformation slider here. I'm going to polish by features, usually once or twice, which is going to go through and soften up those edges on that cloth there. And then I'm going to go to the geometry area and go to the ZRemesher, and I'm just going to give me new topology with ZRemesher as well. So now I've just come through, and let me make sure I delete my hidden. Now I've gone through and just ZRemeshed that model. Now at this stage, I have a mesh that's set up and ready to go for this cloth simulation. So I can go through and use these dynamics now and tailor this. Now before I go further into this, I'm going to activate dynamic, which is going to give me that smooth kind of preview of it. I'm also turn on solo so you guys can see this, and I'm just going to adjust the thickness. Now the thickness comes into play because now I can actually see that cloth with thickness on it, which kind of helps bring the design together and makes it a little bit believable. So it's not this single-sided lightweight piece of geometry, but now it has thickness to it. You can change the offset on this if you want. So I want kind of that outer shape to be outer, and then I want everything else kind of pushed back. So I'm going to change my offset to a -100, and that's going to take now my front shapes on the front, and then it's going to push all that thickness inside the mesh there. So it's really handy because now I can get this shirt kind of feeling more like a shirt. Now I can come across the edges now and smooth those out if I need to, but that's all looking pretty decent through there. And now I can start playing with the dynamics. So in our dynamic menu here, I'm going to adjust some of these sliders over here. So the first thing I want to adjust is the self-collision. Now the self-collision, when you're dealing with wrinkles, if you don't have this turned on and you try to do some wrinkled stuff on things, those wrinkles could collide with each other. And it's not going to give you those nice kind of folds that you're looking for because it's just going to go through the mesh. So you want to make sure you have some self-collision on your models when you're doing any cloth stuff. And then I'm going to run the constrict here, which is going to get that a little bit closer to the mesh. And you can see it's actually, just enough. It's starting to bring in some more of those forms on the model there. And then what I want to do is I want to play with the inflate. Now the inflate option is going to extend the model out. So if I have this is the same thing that Michael was just showing with that kind of comforter. So it's going to pop stuff out and pull it out and give you kind of that inflating process. If you're making a balloon, if you're making that kind of bedspread. Well, I don't want the inflate to happen globally. I don't want it to happen in all directions. So I'm going to limit it down to only happening in the Y direction, which is the vertical axis along the model. So I'm going to come over here and turn off everything except for Y. Now, when I do this, it's going to inflate the model in this kind of way upward. As you can see, as it's inflating, it's going to look at that topology, and I'm going to start getting these wrinkles generated. So these wrinkles are starting going out, the collision volumes is looking at it, and then now I'm getting these nice horizontal wrinkles starting out on my model. And so I can go through the inflate and the contract to kind of bring those in and out. I can also come over here and select that transpose cloth brush, and this will give me that same functionality. So if I come through and now drag up and down, you can see I'm going to contract that form. This is still using that collision volume, and as I contract this up and down, you can see I'm getting those compression wrinkles. So this is the key thing to get the clothing kind of generated how you want it. You want to make sure that you're taking things and kind of using it as you would think cloth would be. So compression folds are when two areas are compressing together, right? And then pulling flows will be when one's pulled. So if you got to, just make sure that you know how the cloth is kind of going to work when you're actually going through and use it. But the biggest thing with the transpose cloth, and this is the one I kind of use most for a lot of things, is you can run it, and as you do it, it's going to transpose around that collision. And so I can pull this up or down, I can come through and do it, and then if it starts going a little bit too much, I can come through and run that contract option again, and it will kind of pull those areas back in together, and now I end up getting that kind of wrinkled shape. Now, once you have this done, you can also use those micro polys too. And this is another thing that's going to give you a different kind of effect on your meshes as well. So these are a lot of fun to play with. Michael just had a few of these kind of pulled up. Make sure I can actually select one here. So I'm going to come through, I'm going to grab, let me find the one I like, this GO1. And this is going to be, variable on how much topology your model has. So right now it's using dynamic. I have a lot of smooth subdivisions applied to this. So if I turn it down, it's going to give me a kind of a lower resolution, but I'm able to see that micro poly there. And then I can actually sort through these and see kind of what these kind of look like. So if you're trying to do chain mail, any kind of different things, you can get some really cool results with this. And once again, this is all live. So this micro poly here is a live geometry. So this isn't like, say, isn't like a micro mesh where you have to do it at render time. This is all going to happen on the fly. So if I come through and say grab that cloth hook brush again and start pulling this up and down, you can see it's actually going to conform. And so this will allow me to come through and control those wrinkles, pull the mesh out. I can do all sorts of different things with this, and that micro poly is going to be updated. So this has been really fun to play with to get different cloth effects. And I can stretch and pull this. I can contort it rather. And you get some really cool shapes and designs out of it. So it's a lot of fun to do some cloth stuff with.